right. Go ahead and look at Luke chapter 15. We're winding down our study of the Prodigal Son. Luke chapter 15, beginning in verse 20. And he arose and came to his father, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion, and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. I want you to take a step back from the story for just a moment. This is where we left off a couple weeks ago, where the father is embracing this son, and the wording literally means he kissed him again and again and again and again, over and over. But let's take a step back from that, and I want you to imagine something a little different than maybe we've ever done before with this story. I want you to imagine the scenario of this boy's return and what it must have looked like through the perspective of the servants. Think about the servants at this time and what they must have thought. Because all of a sudden there's this great commotion that's taking place. And the servants look up and they see their master, the father, sprinting off in the distance, and he's running out of the gate. He's holding the bottom part of his robe as he's running, and the servants are seeing this. And obviously the father is running without slowing down, and he's running without worrying about who is even watching him, because he sees his son in the distance. And the servants, who are used to following this wealthy nobleman around wherever he goes, well, the servants, I see them wanting to know what's going on, and so they're taking off after him to see, well, what's going on. It must have been some kind of scene. In a way, it may be very comical to some to see these servants chasing after this man. But to others, like the Pharisees, it would have been very, very shameful that this man is running to see his son. Again, the patriarch of this family is completely out of character with what he should be doing, according to the Pharisees. It's very disturbing. And then to see the father finally reach this kid who has just been with the pigs. He's stinking, he's dirty, and just to see him take him in his arms, and he hugs him and he kisses him over and over, acting as if his son is home from the war and his son is a war hero. That's how he's treating this kid. And so when you look at it, by the time the servants, as I picture this in my head, the servants finally reach him to see what's going on, and they're huffing and they're puffing, and the father turns around and he tells the servants, quickly, go. And he gives them some orders. And he tells them what it is that he wants them to do. He doesn't want them to wait. He doesn't want them to delay. He wants them to do it quickly. And his message is one of urgency to these servants. And then the scene that follows in the story is just absolutely incredible. When you look at it from the perspective of these Pharisees that are hearing this story. Because there's going to be a banquet. There's going to be a feast. There's going to be gifts. There's going to be a celebration and a ceremonial bestowal of the highest of privileges upon this prodigal. And I don't know if you remember or not, but in one of our earlier lessons, we came to understand that the word prodigal means extravagant. That's what the word prodigal means. It means extravagant. He's been wasteful. He's been reckless. He's lived with extravagance. But now, in an odd shift in the story, do you understand that it is now the father who is the prodigal? The father is now the prodigal. In the eyes of the Pharisees now, it's the father who is the prodigal, because it's very extravagant what he's doing for this kid. It is the father who goes to these extravagant extremes. Look at verses 22 through 24. But the father said to his servants, "Bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. And bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate." Verse 24, "For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." And they began to celebrate. Now, if the eyes of the Pharisees had been rolling up to this point in the story, now they're really rolling. Now they're really losing their mind. They're just bewildered of the actions of this father, because this father has absolutely no shame. Patriarchs during this time do not act like this. He has no dignity. Here they see him in their mind running like a little kid and granting complete pardon to a son who deserved the full measure of wrath, is what they thought. He deserved punishment. And if that's not enough, the father gives this kid the best of everything. I mean, if this boy had just repented, then in the eyes of the Pharisees, okay, he repented. But to bestow upon him such a welcome home was totally inappropriate in their mind. But the father didn't care. You can tell in this story that the father, he didn't care. He didn't care about public opinion. He didn't care about the servant's opinion. He didn't care about the older brother's opinion either. And we'll get to that later. This, in his mind, was cause for a great celebration. Because his boy, the boy that has been gone, the boy that has been lost, the boy has come home. And in his mind, he said he was dead, and now he's what? He's alive. My son is alive. Now I want you to notice the passage. I want you to notice the gifts that he gives to this kid. Each gift is very significant. One of the gifts he says is bring sandals and put them on his feet. Now, the sandals was a gift of sonship. We don't really think too much about that. We just think, okay, he told him to put some shoes on because he's been living pretty rugged, so he probably didn't have any shoes on. You know, that's how we kind of look at things in our society. But this was a big deal because the sandals was an unmistakable symbol to people who lived in that culture that the father has now accepted this son back into the family. Sandals was a big deal. And for him to say, bring sandals to put on his feet, that was a big deal. Because in that culture, if you were a slave, if you were a servant, what did you wear on your feet? Nothing. You went barefoot. So the servants went barefoot. The father in this family wore footwear. The sons in this family wore footwear. And when the father says to the servants, go get this boy some shoes, that was a sign to them and to everyone else of a reinstatement of privilege. See, we don't think about that. Now, again, the Pharisees are hearing this. And so this kid has been given privilege. He says, this, my son, he has come home. Get some sandals so he can put them on his feet. That is a big deal. So that's very significant. Shouldn't the father have withheld some of these privileges when you think about it? I mean, we would think that maybe the boy would need some time to prove himself. Have you ever heard this before? Maybe you've said this before. Somebody comes forward, they repent, and we say, we'll forgive them, but what? Huh? Not forget, or, yeah, that's the second time they've done that. Yeah, they asked for forgiveness, but they're going to have to prove to me that they're really sorry. Right? Maybe we've said that, we've thought it, maybe we've heard other people say that. But notice here, nothing is withheld. Again, they would think that this father needs to sit down with him and go over some ground rules before he's going to get anything back. And so maybe give him some stuff, but you got to prove yourself first before I'm going to give you anything back. Well, apparently this father didn't think so. He said, you go get sandals, you put them on his feet because he's my son and he's home. And then the second thing, the robe. What is it with the robe? Well, the robe is a gift of honor. In those days, wealthy noblemen like this man would have had the best robe. It would have been one of, kind of an outer garment that they would wear. They would hang it in their closet, and it would be brought out only on special occasions, like a wedding or maybe some dignitary that comes into town. And I think the closest thing that we can come to in understanding this robe would be, men, a tuxedo. If you have a tuxedo, you have it hanging in your closet, do you just pull that out and put it on just for anything? What do you wear a tuxedo for?
To look like James Bond.
To look like James Bond. Is that what you do?
Yes. Walk around the house.
Right.
Now we know what Russell does.
Typically for weddings, receptions, so it is a very formal attire.
Exactly, and that's how they would view, when we read about go get the robe, it would be like, go put your tuxedo on, because we're going to have a special celebration here. So, this was a big deal. A wealthy nobleman, again, they have these robes, and this makes this story even more amazing. He gives the order to the servants, go get the best robe and bring it out and put it on. And by the way,
has he bathed yet? No. Go get the best robe and put it on. I don't care if he stinks. I don't care if he's dirty. I don't care. He's home. I want the shoes on his feet, and I want the best robe around his shoulders. And you can imagine, the sense of the Pharisees as they stand around and they're listening to all of this. This is, the kind of courtesy reserved for someone who is, again, some kind of extreme dignitary, somebody special. Not a kid who has gone out and wasted everything, especially the inheritance that the father gave him. And then the father said, third, bring the ring and put it on his hand. That's a symbol of authority. The ring is a symbol of authority. It would be a signet ring. Families, like this family, would have had a family crest. And on the ring would have been the family crest, and so it was the symbol of authority. And so the father says, you go get the sandals, you put them on his feet, you go get the best robe, you put it on his shoulders, and then you go get the ring and you put it on his finger. Jim?
Would that be the ring that you said to
Yep.
seal the wax and the letters?
yep, yeah, when you see where they would seal an envelope, they put wax, and then they put that ring. If they weren't wearing it, they would take the ring and they would
Put it on there?
The signet ring.
The signet ring, yeah.
Yeah. So again, that authority.
And so, again, the Pharisees are they're bewildered by this. They're just bewildered by this. And again, what all of this says is it's a picture of sonship, it's a picture of authority, and it's a picture of honor. The best of the best belongs to my son. That's what he's saying. The best of the best belongs to my son. And so do you not see in the story the picture that God is trying to get us to grasp is what the Father has done for the Son in this story is exactly what Jesus has done for you and I. Russell?
This is a depiction that Christ is giving of grace. You hear the word grace, but you don't fully understand it until you hear this. And it means undeserved favor. So he is giving his son undeserved favor. What he deserves is not this.
Exactly.
It's the opposite of this. But he gave him an undeserved favor. This is grace. The Pharisees are hearing this and thinking, law, law, law. That's all it's going to their mind. This should be it.
Yeah.
It should be driven out. They're not seeing what he's trying to set up here, or what he's trying to explain to them. And that the Father is going to show grace to everyone. I think that's, they missed the point completely. But,
Oh, yeah.
And we do too. But,
Oh, yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
when you hear the word grace, I heard the word grace growing up many times, and I never understood the word was like, does that mean you float on clouds? Or,
Right. Yeah.
no, that's not what it means.
Right.
Because you're given an undeserved favor. What you deserve is death. But you'll be given eternal life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent point. Excellent point. Philippians chapter
2, verses 6 through 8. Philippians chapter 2, beginning of verse 6. Who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. And being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Jesus left heaven. Jesus left heaven. The picture that God gives us of heaven, words really can't describe it. He uses his writers through his inspiration. He gives us a glimpse of what heaven is like. And again, words just can't even put it into how wonderful it is. That's why it uses things like streets of gold, because we can think gold and think, wow, does that literally mean it's gold? No, but we picture that as, wow, you know, that's amazing. And the jewels and all of that, all that we read about, it's an amazing picture that is given of heaven. Jesus left that and came to this earth. He put himself on our level, and how far he was willing to go, even death on a cross, and the humiliation that he suffered for you and for me is by far a greater indignity than anything the Father in this story had to endure. Oh, I'm sorry, Patty.
Everything you say is true, and Russell, you too. But the ring is a more personal thing because of the family, signet, is that what you said?
Signet.
And so that really shows acceptance back into his family.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Giving him that ring. Yeah, he is definitely accepted back. And there's no way they could understand that.
And also giving them ring, we're giving some authority in business decisions. Because now we can communicate for the family.
Mm-hmm.
With that seal.
Right.
So it's that, so he's grabbing it.
And he's back up there.
Yeah.
Yep. Like he never left.
Right, yeah, that's where he would be.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, oh, go ahead.
And we are sealed with the Holy Spirit. So
Mhm. That's an excellent point. Yeah. We are sealed, with the Holy Spirit. But
If the behavior of this father in this story seems exaggerated, it is exaggerated on purpose. Because as exaggerated as it was, what he did for that boy is nothing at all compared to what he's done for us. Nothing at all. This is our story. The story of the prodigal son is our story. It's a story that reminds us that Jesus receives sinners just like this boy. Unclean, filthy. People who come to him offer him nothing except empty souls. That's what it is. You go to him empty. And even though we have absolutely nothing to offer him, he bestows on us everything. Everything. Now, to the Pharisees, the very idea that Jesus would receive sinners was just repugnant. They always complained, he's sitting with sinners and tax collectors. Well, they would see Jesus eating with sinners, and they would see him associating with these sinners, and they were just repulsed by it. And the problem with the Pharisees is really they were too good for Jesus. You can just see it. They just thought that they were too good. And there are still people like that who think that they're too good for him today. You hear it in what they say. You see it in how they act. Again, what a public declaration in this story. Put sandals on his feet. My boy is not going to be treated like a servant. He's my son. Put the best robe on him. He's not merely my son, but he is now favored in my sight. Remember Joseph? The coat? Brothers got jealous of that, didn't they? Now this father's saying, put the best robe on. Put the ring on his hand. He's not just favored in my sight, but he now has all of the rights and all of the privileges that he had before he even left. Think about that. Well, again, understand that everything on the property would have belonged to the eldest son in promise. He's received his inheritance just like his younger brother, but the dad is still living. The dad is still alive. And as long as the dad is still living, the dad is holding the title to all of his assets. And so because he was still living, he could do whatever he wanted because it was his. And so this public gesture that he makes to this son makes no sense whatsoever to the Pharisees. You know, it just seems so unfair in their minds. Especially, it seems unfair to the good guy, the good son. Right? How is that fair to this kid? He never left. He never demanded his inheritance. He stayed home. He's still here with his father. That's not fair. You see, the robe would be his. Now the robe has been defiled by his stinking brother. And so this doesn't make any sense. The boy comes home after the way he's lived, after the choices he's made. The boy comes home and he's treated like a prince. Doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. Servants are ordered to wait on him as though he is some kind of royalty. The townspeople are all invited to come to a celebration. There's no mistaking this message. Full reconciliation, full privileges, full forgiveness. You can't mistake it. And so here's the father who's been absorbing humiliating blow after humiliating blow from a son who has been so dishonorable. And this father who is just willing to set it all aside and take all of that humiliation on himself. He's taken all of that humiliation upon himself. And he set it aside and he freely bestowed on that kid every conceivable privilege. The Pharisees stood there. Again, I picture them with their arms crossed and thinking, you know, there's a problem here. I've got a serious problem with this. Because as Russell pointed out, that is a picture of grace. That is a picture of grace. Last time I checked, God's grace was for people who did not deserve it. They don't deserve it. Did you deserve it? I didn't deserve it. I don't deserve it. That's what grace is. Because I think sometimes we get it in our minds that yes, God saves sinners. We know that. God saves sinners, but he saves the nice ones, right? He saves the nice sinners. He saves the good people who have sin in their lives. That's who he saves. Well, there's no nice sinners. This story, again, depicting exaggerated grace. But when it comes to God's grace for you and for me, it's not exaggerated at all or enough. Because if you stop and think about it, the parable is a scaled down, toned down depiction of what he has done for you and for me. It's just toned down. That's what it's all about. But again, that's not the end of the story. Look at verse 23 again. In verse 23,
Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let us eat and celebrate. As much as the Father has done, he's still not finished. The fattened calf would have been the grain-fed calf. It would have been the calf that was kept in a pen under exercise. It was grain-fed so that it would be the choicest and tenderest of meats. It's the symbol of luxury. That's what this represents, luxury. The fatted calf would have been the calf reserved for maybe a wedding, maybe when one of his sons got married. Again, another special occasion, maybe a dignitary comes, and so they're going to get that fatted calf. It's a meal of luxury. But then, the father, he throws this mega feast celebrating the return of his son in verse 24. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. Again, I've said this in almost every lesson. I wanted to look at this story and read it like we've never read it before. Because again, it's one of those stories that we know it. You hear the prodigal son, you can almost hit the bullet points and yep, I know that story. But I wanted to look at this from a standpoint we've never looked at before. And as I sat and I studied it during this past week, it dawned on me. It dawned on me that the celebration was just as much for the sake of the Father as it was for the Son. When you think about it, it was just as much for the Father. Because the Father had been praying that his Son would come home, and finally he has the opportunity to express himself. It was the Father who gave the boy back his life. It was the Father who forgave him. It was the Father who had restored his sonship. It's the Father throwing this party because the Father wants to share the joy of redemption with everybody. He doesn't want to just have a small little, hey, let's meet, you and your brother get together and let's just have this little tiny celebration, just family. No, he wanted everybody to know. It's a picture of the joy of heaven. That's what it is. It's a picture of the joy of heaven. Go back to verse 7. The very first story that Jesus told in the chapter of 3 stories, there it is in verse 7 of Luke chapter 15. Just so, I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. And then in verse 10, just so I tell you, there is joy before the angels of God over one sinner who repents. Russell?
The point that he's telling this parable
It's to Jewish Pharisees. And even at their best, they're taking that as, they're their older brother complaining about the people that Jesus has been hanging out with, having something with. But you have to step back and realize that this is the Gospel of Luke, which has been written 30 some odd years after Christ's death, and it's been disseminated to Gentile nations. So now they're seeing this parable, and really it speaks to all the way back to Abraham, how he would be the father of many nations. And now God's reconciling himself with those nations outside of just Israel. So at the point this time, it's just the best that they can understand.
Right.
This only applies to Jewish people.
Yeah.
But really, it applies to everyone. So,
Absolutely.
even if they did get it, which I thought they did, that would be the best that explanation they could come up with this term.
Yeah. Excellent point. Any other thoughts? Again, when you look at it, and the Father's talking about, let us celebrate. Let us. He wants everybody involved. And again, when you go back to the context of what Jesus has been saying, in verse 7 and verse 10 of the same chapter, talking about heaven and being joy, being a celebration in heaven when one sinner repents. It's the kind of joy, it is exhilarating, it's refreshing. It's the kind of joy that just doesn't end, is what they're talking about.
In fact, verse 24, if you look at it closely, says they began to celebrate. They began to celebrate. It is the beginning. It is the beginning of a celebration that doesn't end. Do you think that maybe Jesus, again, is giving us a glimpse of heaven? Maybe Jesus here is helping us understand that heaven will be a celebration that doesn't end. Eternity. Again, we're fixated on time. You know, we're here from 7 to 8 o'clock. We go home. Many of us have a bedtime. We set our alarms to get up. We have to be at work at a certain time. Maybe we have breaks or we eat lunch at a certain time. We get off at a certain time. We have sporting events or things like that at a certain time. We're all about time. There is no time. We're in heaven. A celebration that is never ending. And so what are we going to do there? What are we going to do in heaven? Well, again, it's going to be a never-ending celebration of joy as we see the joy of the Father expressed. Don't you think Jesus is going to be there celebrating? The Father is going to be there celebrating. The angels are going to be there celebrating. It's we're going to worship Him. It's the picture that Jesus is giving us in this story of the prodigal son. And we get caught up in that. Again, the Father in the story is amazing. He gives us a picture of God that maybe we haven't seen before. I know the Pharisees hadn't looked at God like this. God is the one who is running. God is the one who is sprinting to receive the sinner. It is God who is giving the orders and calling for the sandals and the ring and the robe. It is God who is throwing a party and a celebration. Overjoyed because people like us. Think about it. Think about your life. Think about what things that you've done. You don't have to share it. We've all done things. But think about your life and how the Father is overjoyed because people like us who have been in the far country, we have changed, we have turned, we have repented, and we have come home. And the Father is throwing a party. He is throwing a celebration. Again, it is a picture of joy. Verse 7 again. Just so I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. So as extravagant as the story is, again, it doesn't compare to what Jesus has done for us. Now, the Pharisees haven't liked any part of this story. They have not liked any part of it whatsoever. They have not found anybody in the story who they can identify with. None of this makes sense to them. There's been nobody in the story this far that has acted like somebody ought to act in their mind. But that's getting ready to change. Because, as we'll study about next week, finally somebody comes into the story who acts like we do, who acts like they thought they should act, and that's the older brother. And so in the Pharisees' mind, here's the hero of the story. The older brother is going to come in, and he's going to act the way he should act. And so we are out of time. Any other thoughts or comments before we end? Charlie.
Puzzled why it said he heard music and he heard dancing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking, well, maybe ching, 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 ching.
Yeah.
Or maybe they stomped a lot.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. Well, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah? Yeah.
Maybe an archaeologist did one.
All right. All right. Well, if there's nothing else.
That is all I have, and we will pick up with the older brother next Wednesday.